bring in our panel today, a member of the National Council of Resistance in Iran, Shahin Gobadi. He is joined by Foreign Affairs analyst Harley Lippman. Welcome to you both. Want to talk about that breaking news that we heard from Zach Anders in a moment. But first, I want to talk about Iran. And in response to Iran's failed attack on U.S. troops stationed in Jordan, CENTCOM launched a major offensive last night. It comes after the U.S. teamed up with the Saudis in order to strike Iran terror proxies in Iraq. Harley, how far do you think this escalation will go?
It will go as far as it takes so that Americans can feel safe, as well as our friends. What's noteworthy about this action in Iraq was a partnership with Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia worked shoulder to shoulder with the United States. They showed that they were a very effective military force. So all the weapons that we've sold them really have come to positive fruition. This is a very important strategic alliance for the United States and is going to ultimately bring peace to the region. I think above all, what I want to share is that what's the ultimate goal here? Is that at the end of the day, if it's to go back to the memorandum of understanding, I think that would be a huge mistake, because that would give Iran a victory and would come back to haunt us. If it's, however, to get the destruction of their nuclear reactor, their centrifuges in Pickaxe Mountain, or to destroy their infrastructure, which would collapse the regime, that would be a good strategic outcome.
Shahin, let me get your thoughts on this latest round of strikes. Is Iran willing to back down? Do you think they're going to negotiate at all going forward?
Well, Tracy, one has to keep in mind that this regime has survived for the last 4 decades on very specific pillars. One, obviously, is repression at home. Second, going for the nuclear weapons. Third has been its, regional belligerence and intransigent, and that's why they have propped up all these proxies. So the regime is in a very difficult situation. I think the key element is to understand the status and the standing of the Iranian regime. Despite all the bluster and propaganda that comes from Iran, and that's, I should reiterate, the narrative that Tehran wants to diffuse, they're in a very weak position. They're facing a disgruntled population, which is about to explode at any moment, a faltering economy, a government which basically its leader has disappeared for the last 5 months after, the supreme leader was, basically killed 5 months ago. A large array of the IRGC commanders are gone. So basically, the regime is struggling to survive. So long as they can, they will go for belligerence, but that should not be viewed as a position of strength by Tehran. Rather, it's a very, very desperate regime, as I said, grabbing at any straw that they can basically grab at this moment. So yes, the regime will be belligerent, but the solution is not simply a military confrontation, rather a regime change, as the other guests mentioned. But that should come by the Iranian people and the organized resistance at its core. And I think so long as you have this regime in power, you will not see tranquility and peace in this region at all.
Yeah, Shahin, I'll follow up with you and ask you this. Do you see that coming soon, anytime soon, a regime change?
It's inevitable. I mean, obviously, soon has to be defined what does one means by soon, but I'm not talking about definitely years and years. This regime has run basically out of its strategic assets. It's its last phase. As I said, in the grand scheme of things, it has lost its supreme leader after 36 years. It lost several layers of its top brass IRGC commanders, and IRGC is basically the fulcrum and the apparatus that has kept the regime in power for years and years. And it's facing, I think, a very, very explosive population. And I think that's the key, that the regime has a lot of difficulties at home. So bringing down the regime is very much within reach. But again, it's a war task of the Iranian people and the organized resistance. And it does not require boots on the ground. It does not require military assistance to the opposition, rather a good political support. And, the regime is quite fearful of this prospect. All one has to listen is to the regime's own propaganda. Its foreign minister had a long interview last week with regime's state-run media, and it was quite clear that he's very worried about the perception of the regime. Another indication is the regime's wave of execution of political dissidents, which has not been covered much in the news. more than 40 dissidents have been executed in Iran in the past few months. Why? The regime is very fearful of another uprising led by the People's Mujahideen organization of Iran, namely the main Iranian resistance movement. So yes, the regime is very weak. One should not buy their propaganda, their bluster, and the response should be a very firm policy. And again, this regime recognizes no borders and no boundaries. Look, which country or region is now immune from them? Kuwait, Oman, Saudi Arabia, UAE, Qatar, any country in the region you name, Iraq has been harmed by this regime. So I think the world is now coming to see that the sole source of all this crisis and turmoil in the region are the mullahs and the mullahs only.
Yeah, and you mentioned executions. There were executions just the other day of some protesters, so this is continuing on. Harley, I want to bring you back in and talk about, despite their pledge to President Trump, meaning China, it now appears that Chinese are planning on supplying Iran with air defense systems. Here's President Trump answering a question about that yesterday. Listen.
Well, that would be surprising. I mean, things like that happen, but that would be surprising. He told me very strongly he wouldn't partake, and he knows I'd be quite disappointed.
So, Harley, let's talk a little bit more about that. What are the consequences here? Is this sort of a direct challenge? I mean, we do know that Chinese have been buying oil from Iran for quite some time.
Yes, Iran is a very important strategic ally of China. China is our number one adversary. Anything we could do to weaken our number one enemy, China, is highly desirable. And I think this raises the most fundamental question here, because people, if I could just pivot a little bit here, I keep reading how this war is very unpopular, but we could have a nuclear 9/11. It's very possible. They are getting to develop a nuclear weapon because they want to use one. This isn't propaganda. We're in denial if we think that this regime, who, when they think they die, they go to heaven and they live in paradise forever. They have a different concept of life and death. And I think we have to be mindful of the reasons why we're in this war. And that while, of course, I'd like to have gas go below $4 an hour, I'd much prefer to know that my children and grandchildren will be safer in this world if there is a regime change, so we don't have to worry about a nuclear bomb hitting an American city. And I think that's what this is really all about.
Yeah, and a lot of people, including the president, saying, a little bit of short-term pain for a long-term gain. And we really hope for peace in the Middle East and around the world, too, as the outcome. Harley and Shahin, great to be with you, gentlemen. Thank you both so much for weighing in today. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having us.